You can't penetrate this organization representing the Rodney Kings of the world. You have to represent cops. That will get you inside. I went from a Rodney King, family of George Floyd practice to a Serpico practice, the cops who want to change their profession. And the chiefs I worked with are the Serpico cops. They want their profession to change. They want the brutal paramilitary suppression containment mission that stems from slavery, because it's nothing but the plantation transferred to the ghetto. They want that changed. And that means you have to change the conditions, and you have to change the political compact that says white safety depends on Black violence and trauma.
Welcome to the Legacy Project. My name is Jim Koppel, president of the Servant Ford Foundation. We're an organization committed to leadership development with a specific focus on service. This podcast and its related activities are about sharing the legacy we have inherited and discussing the legacy we still want to create. Legacy is more than cars, houses, boats, and material possessions that we want to leave to the next generation. Rather, legacy is about core values and beliefs that we inherited from a previous generation. They are the values that shaped us and defined us. Legacy is also about the values we develop or create that can be passed on or shared with the next generation. We will interview people from various backgrounds and walks of life. Some are famous, some, well, maybe not so famous, and others are simply our neighbors, our friends, people who live ordinary lives doing extraordinary things. Become part of this project by being intentional about legacy. More than just memories, but principles that have guided our lives and shaped our decisions. What is the legacy you choose to create? That's what we want to discover. This is Jim Koppel. Welcome to the Legacy Project. We have the honor and privilege today of talking with Connie Rice. Connie Rice is the co-founder of the Advancement Project in Los Angeles. She is probably one of the country's leading civil rights activists and attorneys. She's worked significantly in Los Angeles on criminal justice reform, police reform, education reform, just about every aspect of the social life or structure of Los Angeles. Connie has been involved. And I met Connie 6 years ago when I facilitated President Obama's Taskforce on 21st Century Policing. Connie was a member of that task force. And she has continued to make a contribution in this area, and I'm currently working with her in another council dealing with police reform. And so, Connie, it's an honor to have you a part of this conversation.
Oh, Jim, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Connie, where are you from? Where did you begin your life? So.
Well, I was born in Washington, D.C., Bowling Air Force Base. As I say to people, I was born with dog tags.
Military family.
And we moved more than the average military family because my parents, their specialties had them living all over the world. And I guess we moved about 18 times in 22 years. So it's interesting. I don't identify with place. A lot of military kids don't. Home is not a place. It's a nuclear family.
Mm-hmm. You have brothers and sisters?
I've got two brothers. They're both younger. Not that much younger, though. One's 5 years younger, and my brother Philip and I are 18 months apart. And we're the two scorpions in a bottle who formed each other. He's smarter.
That's hard to believe, Connie.
He's got quite a few more IQ points on me, but he's an ER doc, and my other brother is an anesthesiologist. So two doctors and a lawyer.
Two doctors and a lawyer. Well, that gets it covered. When you were growing up, as you were getting educated, and you're involved in your family life, who were the most influential people in your life? Who were the people that helped shape who you are?
Well, obviously my parents. I wrote a book called Power Concedes Nothing, and the first third of it is how I grew up and why they were such an influence. You know, when you move every year, all you have is your nuclear family. You don't have a lot of friends because you leave them every year. Your teachers change every year, not just because you go up a grade, but your school, your state, everything changes. We lived in Europe. We lived in Japan. You're in places where you don't even speak the language. So you are abnormally tight with your core family. And a chapter in my book is called Tribe of Five. And it's a nuclear bond. It's closer than the average family. And so my mother, who's a force of nature, my dad, who was a force of nature, they're the two main influencers. But there are a lot of people in my family, just a few teachers, but professionally, it was Barbara Jordan. I saw the Watergate hearings, and I thought I heard the voice of God when she thundered.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, she was amazing.
I will not be a party. I thought, okay, I want to be her. She had that whole committee enthralled, and she certainly had me. It was so funny. I begged my mother, who's an achievement junkie. We had to do swim team and life saving, and every the summer we dreaded the summers. We looked forward to school to get a rest because she piano lessons and swim team and this and that and concerts. Oh my gosh. And so I begged her. I was in 11th grade. I begged her. I said, just let me watch these hearings, Mom. And I said, I'll do the ironing. And I hate ironing. So she knew how much I knew I really wanted to see them. And I'm in the basement. We were living in Cleveland at that point for my 11th grade year. And 12th grade was in Texas. So I went to 3 different high schools. But I'm in the basement, and Barbara Jordan came on. And I mean, that iron stayed on my dad's shirt till it was charcoal black. I completely forgotten I was ironing. I was transfixed. So she was the first woman lawyer I saw that inspired me, and I'll never forget. She said, "My mother did not raise me to be mediocre," and that could be my mother's motto as well.
Did you ever meet Barbara Jordan?
No, I never did. I sort of met Thurgood Marshall. When I was in law school, and he spoke at my law school, and I wanted to meet him, and he had no more interest in meeting these silly law students than he had in dealing with the man in the moon. But I hid under the stairs of the stairwell, and I knew he was going to race down the hall to get into his car, and his bodyguards would be right behind him. And so I pop out in front of him and I stop him. He's like 6'6", and I'm not exact. I think I'm 6'6", but I'm actually not. And I stop him in his tracks, and I said, Mr. Justice, I said, Justice Marshall, I'm working at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, your law firm, and I'm going to follow him. If he could care. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. Just the stupidest thing I've ever done. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, you're going to have to do a hell of a lot better than we did." And he laughed and got in his car. So I didn't meet Barbara Jordan, but I forced a meeting on the hapless Justice Marshall. That was so stupid. I mean, total waste of his time. But the nanosecond that it was, no, I didn't meet her. But you end up getting I start my book with not a confrontation, an interaction I had. It was 7th grade, and Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. And Phoenix was still very agricultural back then. And a lot of migrant workers' families, and most of the migrant workers' families were Black. And the base kids, I was a base kid, the base kids at the junior high school were in brick buildings with air conditioning. And the migrant workers' kids were in trailers that were unair conditioned. And there was a dirt field, not a field, but like maybe a tennis court, 2 or 3 tennis courts in between them. And this little dark-skinned boy crossed the dirt and climbed up on the platform where our lockers were. And I was aware of the separate and unequal situation, and I was bothered by it. And he comes up to me and he says, "What is you?" He had been watching me, and he couldn't tell what I was. He says, "Is you Japanese?" Because I would wear my hair up in a top knot, and he couldn't tell what I was. I looked Asian to him. And I said, no, I'm black like you. And he said, no, you ain't. And he turned around and he walked away. And I looked for him and looked for him, and I finally found him. And I talk about our interaction. And I said, I want to see where you live. The arrogance, even then I was arrogant. I said, I want to see where you live. I want to know more about you. And so he took me. We walked in. It was like a mile down. They didn't have a bus. We had buses. They did not. They had to walk in the heat. Walking in the heat is a shack. It's like a tin shack. And his mom had made curtains out of old bed sheets, and the shower was a pail with a hose. I mean, it was. You go to Appalachia, you see conditions like that. It was the first time I had been confronted with haves and have-nots, and I didn't think of myself as part of the haves until that point. And it made me realize the color cast privilege, that if you look white and you're whiter and your ancestors were half white during slavery, you came out on top of the slave post-slavery pyramid. That's my family.
Mm.
His family left Mississippi without even the shirts on their back.
Yeah.
And so the dynamics of slavery met the two of us. And I looked at him and I realized he had more grit. He had more self-confidence. He had everything I did not have, and yet he had nothing. And so he taught me a number of very important life lessons at the age of, I was 12 or 13 at the time. And he was probably in fifth grade or something. I was in seventh grade. He was smaller. It may have just been because of the bad food and stuff. He may have just been smaller. But I looked for him. I looked for him. I never saw him again. And I realized that the families had to move with the crops. The education of the kids didn't matter.
Yeah.
So I confronted my teacher, and I said, they don't have air conditioning. I was already advocating. He's probably one of my first clients. And actually, my first client was in second grade at the only African-American school I went to, and he was a disabled kid, and the kids would pick on him, and I would defend him. I can't stand bullies. And if you're a bully, you're in trouble if I'm around. I stood down the whole class to defend him. So I've always had that DNA. But, people all along the way, and every place I've ever lived, I've learned from the people I interact with. But the core of why I am the way I am is part of it's DNA, but a lot of it is my parents.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of values did they transmit to you?
Well, my dad was an amazing man. We just buried him with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. He was in the military for close to 30 years with us, like trailing his comet.
Yeah.
Followed his star wherever he went. He was an amazing man. He was fluent in 5 languages. He was DIA. He flew 17 fixed wing planes plus helicopters. Helicopters were his specialty. So he was an ace pilot. He was a diplomat and a spy. And because the Air Force wasn't integrated, his white and Jewish mentors told him, look, Phil, these white crackers who run the military and have all these damn bases named after Confederate soldiers, they've never seen a black man like you, and you're going to scare them. So the only way for you to survive is to solve the problems they're too stupid to solve. And you get the promotion, but they get the credit for what you do. And that's why we moved every year. It was the only way for us to survive the racism, or for him to survive the racism. So he was amazing. Jazz artist. He was this rigid disciplinarian, but loved the freedom of jazz. He was a total introvert, but the most gracious host. He was interesting paradoxes, but lived by the code, lived by a code of honor, lived by a code of integrity. They weren't words to him. You were to stand and deliver. And you don't lie, you don't cheat, you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, the golden rule. And he lived it in everything he did. You never saw him part from it. He lived what other people talk about. All those lapel pin patriots up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
I don't even want to hear them. I was born with dog tags, and my dad actually served in Vietnam. He didn't have to go because he was an officer, and we were in London, and he was the first African American Air Force liaison to the embassy, and he was a member of the court of King James. I mean, it was amazing. Got to meet the Queen and so forth, and that was the longest time we stayed anywhere, was in London. It was so funny. My brother Philip, who is the genius in the family, they were always gone because they had to go to all of these parties and meet. It was all my mom. My mom worked for the NSA. So the two of them, these two, but you have to wonder how a black man could be a spy in Soviet Union, because he was fluent in Russian. He was ranked as the second best non-native Russian speaker in the language school in the military. So he was totally fluent. And even reaching us 10 years ago, we were at a Martha's Vineyard, and there was a Russian. Somebody from the Russian embassy, and he started speaking Russian, and the man couldn't believe he wasn't from Moscow. So anyway, we were going through our parents' closet one night when they were out, and we saw this Pan Am uniform. How long ago it was. And my brother said, "Oh, Dad's a spy." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, He's in the military, and he's got a civilian. His cover is a Pan Am. So we were 10 and 8 when we figured out they were spies. Anyway, I'll tell you, Jim. I think it was funny. I was in college. I was listening to Morning Becomes Eclectic, or some kind of NPR morning program, and they had an interview with a nomad from Northern Africa. And through translation, this nomad was describing his life perspective. And I almost dropped my toothbrush because I said, "Oh my God, that's what I am. I have the world eye of a nomad. You're always a stranger. You get close to no one. You learn to read systems and people instantly because you can't survive as a stranger in every new place you go unless you can figure out who's who and what's what and where the dangers are." And so I guess if you ask for my genetic or sort of socio-political DNA, it's more nomad than anything else.
So how have those values and those influences shaped who you have become?
I think that aside from the values from the family, my mom's a Barnes, my dad's a Rice. The Rices are pathological achievers. The Barneses are extremely smart and very street savvy. So I got both sides, although my brother's a much bigger geek than I am. There are two geeks, and then there's Norman, who's the anesthesiologist, and he's a man of the world, football player, just normal. He's more normal than Philip and me. Philip and I probably belong on the Big Bang Theory or something. We're not quite human, but I think that maybe the biggest influence, I guess you could say, all of that background really freed me. I realized that I wasn't normal when I got to college. I went to Radcliffe, which is the female door to Harvard. Back then, Radcliffe no longer exists. My degree has, as one of the last two classes, has Harvard and Radcliffe on the degree. I didn't know I was applying to Harvard. I'm probably the only person that got into Harvard and didn't know she was going. My dad brought the application home. I'd never heard of Radcliffe, and he says, "I need you to apply here." I said, "He's paying for it," so I apply, and I got into every school, and I went to Radcliffe, and they were giving the president of Harvard, Martina Horner, was giving a lecture to the female students, the incoming class, the freshman, and the lecture was on fear of success. And I'm looking around there. I was like, "What fear of success?" I said, I didn't understand what she was talking about. I didn't have any fear. I've never been afraid. I think it's actually not courage, because courage means you overcome fear. Being fearless is actually dangerous, because It's not that you don't recognize the danger; it's that you don't heed it.
Right. You're right.
And so I'm looking around. I got up and left the lecture because I said, "This is a waste of time. We're at Harvard. Who's afraid of success?" What are they even talking
That's a
about?
good point.
What the hell are they talking about? But what I realized was that because I had moved every year,
Mhm.
I didn't get infiltrated as deeply with the negative cues that little girls get.
Mm.
I didn't get marinated in the lowered expectations, and I didn't get infused with the doubts. My parents, my brothers and I did the dishes. In fact, I was probably a double standard against them because I didn't have to mow the lawn, but they had to do dishes. So that's when I realized, because I was looking at them and everybody else was nodding and I'm shaking my head no and leaving. And I said, okay, all right. So that was kind of my first clue. One of my best friends, Janethio, says, Connie, your problem is you think everybody thinks like you and nobody does. And she's absolutely, it's taken me about 50 years to realize that. So I guess it's marked most as extremely free, unhindered. I'm one of the few people I know who's been able to live her life completely on her terms. I finished my bucket list a long time ago. So there are very few people who are not weighed down by a lot of psychological baggage. And this is from a Black woman who, internally, I'm not, I don't, that is not my identity. I choose that identity. I could, it's interesting. I think I did Taekwondo for 10 years and I realized I pushed myself to such a physical limit that you actually transcend into a mental plane. It's what Olympic athletes reach. It's transcendent. And when I was competing for my black belt, I reached that plane and I couldn't even feel my body. All identity went away. And it was just the sheer energy of your soul, your being. And it was probably akin to a very high level religious experience, to reach that level of mental connection with just the energy of the universe, and totally bodiless, no body, no corporal presence or awareness at all. And so people meditate to reach that state. I got it through the physical exertion of not mastering. If you get a black belt, it means you're ready to learn. Americans think it's the pinnacle, but in South Korea, they'll tell you, no, it means you're a serious student. But I had my black belt at that time, and my technique was incredible. I had won 3 national AAU championships and had been asked to go to the exhibition games and to exhibit in South Korea American Taekwondo. And the women who won 3 national championships in a row got to fight the men. And so I had reached that level. I actually fought in Madison Square Garden. The poor guy I beat, he probably never recovered. So it was very interesting. It was through the physical exertion and determination to master in Taekwondo that kind of, that was the sort of essence. But that when I was there, that's who I was. The rest of it is imposed by society and you deal with it. But it's not the core of your identity. It's not what you would have on your tombstone.
So, Connie, based on what you just said in this description, have you ever known fear?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. I've been in some dangerous situations, in prisons. When I lived in Boston during the busing, my roommates and I got attacked twice by men from South Boston who didn't like black people coming into Southie. Mm. I honestly, I get anxious, but it's not fear.
So, and particularly in the professional, academic, activist world in which you've lived, when you walk into a room, have you ever felt like, what am I doing here? Or that I don't, a sense of inadequacy? I mean, today in modern psychology, they call it the imposter syndrome, where you feel like you've never felt that.
I come into a rate, and I had my top lawyer is Susan Lee, and And she said, Connie, you don't walk into a room. You you don't walk, you stride. And when you walk into a room, the look that you have on your face is, what are you people doing and why do I have to be here? I mean, and I don't even know I'm projecting that, but I am. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's like, you people don't have a goddamn idea what you're doing. Get out of my way. You're messing over these kids. You haven't built a damn school in 30 years. Get out of my way. It's no, not in that. And it's interesting. It's not, if, for example, when you're learning the cues of privilege, I understand that when I'm in the California club or I'm in the other billionaire boys clubs that some of my mentors would take me to, um, uh, I watch carefully to see what people do and don't do, and then I mimic the behavior. But I never feel that I have an anthropologist's eye, and I look at different situations as, oh, what's this interesting pod of primates doing? My mother says we're basically chimpanzees with nuclear weapons. And so, I look, I'm constantly analyzing, okay, what's this tribe all about? What's their pathology? What injury are they overcoming? What makes them happy? What do they value? And in what way do they value? Everybody values family in some way, but the Italians do it differently from the Irish. I mean, and Southern African Americans do it different from folks in Detroit. And, so I'm kind of a student of anthropology. I love the anthropological eye. You can bring a lot of eyes, and I have a lot of lenses through which to see things. And the most useful one is the anthropological eye, which is you need to assess. It's the nomadic eye also. So when I walk into a room, even when I walk into a room full of, and I mean people, I'm talking about the titans of the world, the oligarchs who run the world. We don't have a democracy. We have an oligarchy with elections. And right now we don't even have elections.
Right.
We have a Madisonian framework. We haven't achieved it yet. And in the meantime, the oligarchs are running things. They pay for the politicians and they set the agenda. We vote on their agenda. And the votes that they need, they've already paid for. Just ask the Koch brothers. So I understand our system because I read systems. But when I'm in the room with the billionaires, I speak to them as equals, and that's what throws them. They always call me a force of nature. I don't know why they say that. I'm not a force of nature. I just don't. I don't obey the cues that they expect a Black woman to obey. That's because I never got them. I missed the memo. I'm not affected by it. And whether it's prison guards or cops with guns or gangsters. Somebody said, weren't you afraid of the Grape Street Crips? I said, no, because I know alpha males. The one thing alpha males respect is an alpha female. If you go in as a real alpha female, an uber alpha female, you can get along with all the alpha males, generals, top gangsters, chiefs of police. You go in there as their equal, you look in their eye, and you don't blink, you don't flinch, and you state stuff succinctly. You don't use the girl voice. And they'll back up. They've always backed up. It's fascinating to me. These big, tough. Now the psychopaths, the ones who are like Ted Bundy and Donald Trump, the folk that are sociopaths and psychopaths and are on the psychopathy scale, you learn to read that too. And those guys you don't get very close to. But it's so funny. I actually realized that there was a guy in the cafeteria at Harvard. I lived in Quincy House, and I knew he wasn't a student, and he was following my roommate. My roommate was gorgeous, and she, we'd often have to, shoo these men away from her. And this guy was watching Jennifer, and I looked at his eyes, and they were like a shark's, dead. And I said, this guy's a psychopath. He's on the psychopathy scale. He just had those dead eyes. And I called the police. And they escorted him out. And sure enough, 3 years later, I was working at the Harvard Admissions Committee. I'd graduated. He got arrested. He was a serial killer. Same guy. So I mean, I read people like with X-ray vision, and but I wasn't afraid of him either. I just knew to read him because I sensed danger. And so no, I honestly, and I don't belong in any of these places. Maybe that's why I don't feel uncomfortable in any, because I don't really belong anywhere. You don't belong to any one place. You belong everywhere. And so,
Uh,
or I feel privileged to be where I am. I do understand privilege, and I understand that in a system that is a racial caste system, which is what we have, our system isn't that different from South Africa's. We dress it up in better language, but we were a slaveocracy, um, born in a vision of freedom. It's both. I don't have any problem accepting both. I can appreciate George Washington as the reason we have a democracy, because he believed in a free republic, at least free for white aristocratic landowning men, but that was a start, enough to hand over power peacefully.
right.
And until this last fool who was in the White House before Biden, we had peaceful transfers of power. So I can appreciate his genius, Madison's genius, Jefferson's genius, all of them. They all owned slaves. And at the same time, accept and acknowledge and not deny the fact that they owned slaves. For me, we're in a moment, we're in the fifth racial reckoning in this country, and I don't know that we're going to survive this one. We barely survived the Civil War one, which was the third national racial reckoning. And I'm not sure that white America is going to do what's necessary this time around.
So we're talking to Connie Rice, who is the co-founder of the Advancement Project and probably one of the country's leading civil rights activists and attorneys. Connie, I want to go back to a comment, and I'm not too sure I can artfully answer this question, so I'll just ask it the best way I can. In listening to you and the world in which you've had to navigate because you move so much and no sense of place, etc., that in people that I've interviewed in the Legacy Project and other places, being a woman, a Black woman, in an era and an age where you had to prove yourself over against everyone, you didn't seem to be intimidated by that. You're who you are, and wherever you're at, you're going to express your mind, your heart, your soul, and you're not going to be. You've never really had to feel that, or you've never embraced it. Let's put it that way. That sense that you don't belong.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you come from a family that's so strong. My mother equipped us for the racism we would face everywhere. I mean, there's a word for nigger in every language from Armenian to Yiddish. That's what white America has taught the world. So we've exported the anti-Black racism this country has. And so everywhere we went, it was just a question. I say, America is the Baskin Robbins of racism. And I just need to know which flavor I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
And, none of it bothered. My mother taught us how to navigate racism through the Holocaust. She didn't burden us with slavery. Tribes do this. I noticed that my Irish friends, you talk to their great grandmothers and their grandmothers. And I remember talking to my grandmother Carrie, the grandmother of one of my best friends from Harvard, and she wouldn't talk about the famine because she did not want to shame her grandchildren. She didn't want them to bear that shame. Well, it's the same thing in my family. You couldn't get my great grandmother to talk about slavery. She was freed when she was 12. I'm the great granddaughter of slaves, not great. I'm the great granddaughter of slave owners. But often tribes will use another tribe's trauma to teach the lessons of genocide, to teach the lessons of oppression, to teach the lessons of suppression. And my mother, who had us reading by the time we were 3, and she's a teacher, as well as in her former life an NSA SIGINT intelligence officer. The only book she ever gave me, I was 8 years old, and she came into my bedroom and she handed me a book and she said, "This is the only book I will ever require you to read." And it was The Diary of Anne Frank. And that was one of the, she bought books on the Holocaust. She steeped us in the Holocaust. I understood it as the first time genocide had ever been industrialized continent wide. Um, and that's the difference. Slavery over 7 centuries was a slow rolling Holocaust that took and killed as many as 13 million over in the entire continent. That's a full 700 years, starting with the Portuguese, working their way through down to the British. In this country, it's 400 years old. So I studied slavery at Harvard and government, slavery and power. And so she taught me to get that mindset to fight that most grotesque and mass level of xenophobia and hatred. And then for the anti-black racism that we encountered everywhere we went, because we were often the only black kids in the class. I was often the only black kid in the AP classes. Everywhere we went, the counselors wanted to put us in non-AP classes. We knew how to fight that battle because we had to fight it at every school we went to. They just assumed if you're a black kid, you're going to be in the non-college courses. Well, not only were we in the college courses, we had to be in the top honors courses. We had to be in, I had 5 AP classes. I wasn't just going to a college, I was going to an Ivy League college. And that's the Rice, that's the Rice ethos. So we it's not that we didn't face the racism, it's that we had different armor. And my mother, I remember we were in North Carolina, and it was really bad back then. And that was first grade for me, and we were at Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And I remember my mother saying, "Connie, now, you know, this is going to sound so funny. There are people who think they're better than us because we're black and they're white. Isn't that funny?" And we would laugh. Oh, it's just so funny. And she says, "That's just hilarious." And she says, "Well, they have an illness, and it's called racism. And what do we do with people who are sick?" And I said, "We help them get better." "Yes, we have to help them get better." So she gave me, and I went through I went to first grade thinking the poor white people, they're so sick,
Yeah.
I already, and that put me in a position of superiority. I knew, they didn't understand they were sick, and I had to understand that they were sick, and just don't listen to them, and you carry on. And I'll never forget. I always had one little friend. I had a little friend. She was blonde, blue-eyed. Her name was Mona, and she started getting taunted as a nigger lover by these little hoodlum boys. They were like, hockey hoodlums, and she started crying. I wasn't crying. And I said, "Mona, you don't have to stay with me. I'm fine by myself." And she said, "Why aren't you upset?" I said, "I'm not upset because they're sick and I'm not." And, it just rolled like water off a duck. And I'll never forget an IQ test that I took. And I was determined to get 100% on it because that's what we do. And there was a question, and it had a picture of a little white girl and a little black girl. And it said, "Pick the one that's ugly." And the little black girl's picture looked just like mine, just like me. And I knew what the right answer was. And I picked the little black girl. And I said, "The tests are also sick."
Yeah.
And my teacher actually told my mother, "Your daughter has a low IQ." Well, it was a lie. My teacher was a racist. I actually knew my multiplication tables by then. It was first grade, and I could actually multiply, complex numbers by then. And she was angry that I was showing the other kids what I could do. So she'd make, but I'm a little bit dyslexic. I multiply from left to right rather than right to left. And she would make me get up, and I would tell her, "But that's the right answer."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was 6, and I was telling this old hag, "That's the right answer." So no, I was equipped with armor most black children don't have, and most little girls don't have.
Yeah.
And I was free because I never stayed long enough to be damaged.
I love that phrase. I was free.
Yeah. I was free because I didn't stay long enough for it to stick. And then I think also, I honestly don't care what other people think. Well, I don't do social media. I don't care I care what populations need. I guess I'm not good one-on-one, but systemically, it's kind of like the difference between what did Martin Luther King Jr. say? The difference between agape and amor.
Yeah.
And I'm agape.
Mm-hmm.
I will fight like a tigress for fairness to everybody, but I don't particularly want to socialize with anybody. Total loner, total loner. So when you're that self-sufficient, you don't have the normal needs of a human being, and so you're strange. You're a stranger. And I think we didn't get bullied. My brothers and I didn't get bullied, not only because we left quickly, but because we were so intense and so smart, and we were strange. We were just strange. We spoke the king's English to the queen's taste, but we were black. We were super smart, and we weren't there very long. I remember moving to Edwards Air Force Base, just brand new kid, ran for president of the class and won. Okay, totally fearless. Yeah, every environment I enter, I take over, and it's just the way we were equipped.
That statement sort of anticipates. I have two more questions. This could go on for hours. You're such a rich and diverse personality. But the question I want to ask is, I call it when it's all said and done question. When it's all said and done, Connie, what do you want people to remember you as? What do you want people to think when they hear the name Connie Rice? What do you want them to think about?
She fought like a dragon for people who couldn't, and she lived a life of purpose. Somebody once asked me, "What do you want on your tombstone?" And I said, "Still raising hell."
Yeah.
I've been told by many pastors that's where I'm going.
I as somebody with a degree in theology, I will say I would challenge that. So let me ask you this next question. It's based on a romantic comedy, a movie that I watched years ago, where the suitor asked the ingenue. It was in Ireland. It took place in Ireland. The movie was called Leap Year. And he asked her, if your house were to catch on fire and you could grab one thing besides children, husbands, parents, anybody, what one thing would you grab out of your house that kind of, to you, encapsulates who you are and your past, your present, your future? What's the one thing you would grab?
Well, it would be the people. There's no thing.
Now, take them off the table for a minute.
Yeah.
What symbol or icon? I have a black box that my father, who was a World War II veteran, decorated. He gave me. He actually saved a man's life with out of this medical kit that he had, and he gave me that kit. And I put special stuff in that over the course of my career. And I would probably grab that.
I can describe what's in that box. The degrees, my black belt, my dog tags, and family portrait.
Yeah, that is powerful. And the way you've described the influences that all of that have had. You have inherited a great legacy, and you have left an amazing legacy. To our listeners, I would add this, that Connie is prominently featured in a new book by Bill Bratton called The Profession that really kind of summarizes Bill Bratton, probably one of America's, if not the America's leading chief of police, Boston, New York, and Los Angeles. Connie had the ability to navigate that world with Bill Bratton to drive reform in policing, and Charles Beck, the chief that followed Bratton, if I got that right. An unusual collaboration and an unusual partnership that helped drive a lot of reform. And the respect that Bratton gives to you in his writing in this book is huge. Let's close with this question. I'd like to get your thinking, and I think the audience would appreciate your thinking. How did you do that? As the activist that you are, you stand on the side of the oppressed, and you have witnessed police brutality and police behavior for years in Los Angeles, and yet you were able to come alongside the symbols, if not the reality, of oppression in your city. How did you do that?
Well, I listen to the people I represent.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a neighborhood that's so safe people don't lock their doors. I live on an estate, my law partner's estate. Um, so I experience safety. I think, Jim, I realized a long time ago that I was trained as a lawyer to do certain kinds of cases. I'm a litigator, and I love to fight. Litigation is combat in a court, and I love to fight. And I was having a great time doing these cases. I'd wake up every morning, figure out a new way to sue LAPD, and it was great fun. And I was winning my cases, and my clients were dying. There was a crack war, and the poorest of the poor lived in a war zone, 10 miles south of me, while I lived in absolute safety. You had 700 times the chance of dying from a stray bullet in Watts than you did in Pasadena. And there were third world levels of violence. And anybody who lived in that neighborhood suffered it. And when when one of my secretaries lost her husband, shot in the back of the head, and then our tech guy, Oscar, his brother was coming out of church practice, choir practice, at 8 o'clock at night, died in a drive-by. And I said, what the hell am I doing? I'm up here getting plaques and winning cases, and folks are dropping like flies, and the kids aren't safe. The kids are totally traumatized. So I said, we aren't even providing the basics. Cops aren't doing anything but making it worse. There was a war. They had a war on gangs, a war on drugs, and weren't making anybody safer. They were just carrying out war. And I said, this is too stupid to continue. And so I decided that I had to fight the violence. I knew that there were good cops because when I was in full metal jacket war with LAPD, I had something like 5 class actions against them all at once. And right after the Rodney King riots in '92, but even before then, I would go down to Watts at night because you can't figure out what's going on unless you're on the ground. Because the cops lie to you, the gang members lie to you, community members don't trust you. The only people who will tell you the truth are the medical workers at the hospitals where the gunshot wound victims come in, and they will tell you how many cross colors killings there were, how many inter-gang killings there were, because most of the homicides were gangs. Then you had the domestic violence and stuff, but I was interested in the street violence. So I would go down to Watts at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is the fearlessness, my dad read my book, which by the way is Power Concedes Nothing, if you really want to know my story. My dad said if I had any idea what you were doing, I'd have come down there and gotten you. I said, yeah, that's why I didn't tell you. But I would go down there at 2 o'clock in the morning and I would watch what the cops would do. I'd watch what graveyard shift, because you don't know what a police department is doing unless you see what graveyard shift is doing. And I would watch the gang members. I'd watch them moving their guns, and I would watch their violent crap. And these two toxic male cultures, okay? And here I am, a black feminist. They call me the Black Murphy Brown. I'm dating myself. Nobody knows who Murphy Brown is. I'd be down there and watching this. And during the day, sometimes I would get a telephone call at my office, and it would be a cop, an LAPD officer, mainly African-American officers, but a few white officers as well, who would find a phone booth. For you young people, look it up. It's in the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
They would find a phone booth, and they would call my office and whisper, Miss Rice, don't come down to Watts tonight. I thought I was incognito. Stupid me. Everybody knew I was down there. But they would say, Miss Rice, don't come down there. Graveyard is gunning for you, and we can't protect you. So there were cops who knew I was down there. They were protecting me from other cops. Because back in those days, LAPD had death squads. And they would do curbside executions. And they would actually sit in the squad room and plan whom to kill. And one of them was me. So I knew there were good cops from those calls. They were and that's when I realized, oh, okay, so my job isn't to try to vanquish policing. My job is to put the good cops who are not in power right now, put them in charge. And then I'll have some partners. Because one thing I understand is you can't change institutions like the military or policing. You can't change engineering cultures, policing cultures, or military cultures from the outside. They're too clannish. They're too tribal. And when you bond in a foxhole culture, there's no outsider that can penetrate it. So you have to infiltrate. You can't assault it from the outside. Now, I had to assault it from the outside because there was no entry. LAPD didn't talk to you. If you didn't walk toward bullets, they didn't care what the Supreme Court said. They certainly didn't care what I said. So they were impervious. And after the Rodney, so I knew that there were good cops. And I was also learning, I was winning my cases, but it wasn't making any difference. You can win all the cases and get all the consent decrees and all the recommendations in the world you want. It's not going to touch them. And after the Rodney King riots, I came in on there was smoke still smoldering. I mean, we President Bush hadn't even come yet. And there's a man sitting in my office at 7:00 in the morning, and I'm like, he looked just like my dad. And I said, "Oh, Dad." I thought my dad was making a surprise visit, and it was Chief Jess Brewer from the LAPD, the first black assistant chief of LAPD. He came up under Darrell Gates. And he got up, he fixed some coffee for himself. He was right at home in my office. And he said, "I'm so glad you're here, Connie. I'm going to teach you how to bring LAPD down. This is it. This is my gift to the public as I leave." And Mayor Bradley made him head of the police commission. And for 6 hours, I took notes. I have like 7 legal pads full of notes from him. He said, you can't penetrate this organization representing the Rodney Kings of the world. You have to represent cops. That will get you inside. And so I went from a Rodney King, family of George Floyd practice to a Serpico practice. The cops who want to change their profession. And the chiefs I worked with are the Serpico cops. They want their profession to change. They want the brutal paramilitary suppression containment mission that stems from slavery, because it's nothing but the plantation transferred to the ghetto. They want that changed. And that means you have to change the conditions, and you have to change the political compact that says white safety depends on black violence and trauma. And until that political compact changes, we're not going to change anything. But the chiefs I worked with understood that you had good people doing a toxic mission, and that we could change the mission to some extent just in the realm of policing without having to deal with the outside world. Except that if you want to do real trust policing, relationship-based policing, community policing, you have to change the conditions in the war zones, in the poor areas, in the high violence and trauma areas. And so it has to be an ecosystem. It can't just be soldiers being sent into a war. And you've got to get rid of the war frame. And you have to change the mentality and the mindset of the cops. And that's what Bratton and Beck and I did. And my clients were the first cops to teach me how cops think. I don't talk civil rights with cops. I talk their language. I tell them, this will get you home to your family better. You know, the little old lady in Watts housing projects who would watch you bleed out in the alley. Change the relationship. She'll pick up the phone if you get shot.
Connie, this has been amazing. I feel like I may need a part 2 and a part 3.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. It's always great to be with you, and thanks for being interested. I've got a great story. Nobody knows it. That's because I don't really care if anybody knows it. I'm not. You got to understand. I'm just not driven by I'm not driven by money. That I missed the money gene. I missed the fame gene. I missed a lot of things. I got a lot of missing affects. But what I'm good at, I'm good at.
I think there are some people who would greatly benefit by hearing your story. I think there are young women, young black women, young professionals, police officers who understand where you're coming from and what you're doing. And I think just also the sheer determination. I mean, recently after I actually met John Lewis. He and I flew on a plane together for 3 hours, and we had this amazing conversation. And when we got up to leave, he turned to me and he said, "Jim, I want to thank you for your service to the country." And I said, "You're thanking me?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, well, and one of the things that he taught me in that conversation, and then reading his John Meacham's biography of Lewis, was just how to overcome fear. I wish I had learned that skill years ago.
You have to evaluate people's what they overcome.
Right.
And I understand what people are saddled with once I understand where they were born, how they were raised. And for white Americans, it's the frame of reference is so debilitating.
Yeah.
And so white Americans who overcome that to reach across are extraordinary in this culture, because we're so segregated, we're so isolated, and we're two separate and unequal societies right now, with a little sliver of Obamas and Connies in the middle, as examples of the exceptions. But systemically, this country is going to fail because of its huge equality gap. Now that's reached white people, it will count. Yeah. It's always been there for African Americans. And it's the white people all through our 400-year history. The question I always ask is, would you hide Anne Frank? And would you help Harriet Tubman? Wow. There are very few human beings who fit in that category. Yeah. And the only human beings who do fit in that category have overcome that fear and are so glued to their principles that they would die for them. Yeah. And there are very, very few people who would do that.
That's absolute freedom when you can get to that point.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And you transcend all of the stuff below. Yeah. Problem is, it means other people can't touch you and understand you. Yeah. And they're not with you. Right. So it's a loner's journey. Yeah. But I think what John Lewis sensed in you was someone who strived to overcome those shackles, the shackles that white people have, the blinders that white people have. I had a friend tell me, Connie, you could pass for white if you wanted to. I said, I chose to be black. That was a choice. That's because I would never want to be white. I would never want to be that blind to what's in front of me. Yeah. And so, it's, and I've got nothing but compassion. I'm totally open. I accept people from where they are, and I try to help them advance, and they help me advance. But it's debilitating. And sure. You see it on full display now. It's desperate last gasps of white supremacy. Yeah. Yeah.
To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. We want to hear from you. We want to get your ideas and your opinions. I have a new book that corresponds with the Legacy Project titled The Seeker, Bring Me the Horizon. You can find a copy of it on Amazon or your preferred book distributor. The book corresponds closely with these podcasts. The podcast episode was produced by Matt Erickson and edited by Carissa Erickson. The music is by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode of our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build a future.